The town of Ridgeway existed like a stain on the prairie, a collection of warped wooden buildings fighting against wind that never stopped, dust that never settled, and a sun that baked everything into submission. Clara Whitmore stepped off the supply wagon with a carpet bag that weighed almost nothing and a teaching certificate that weighed even less. The driver didn't wait. He cracked his whip and the wagon lurched forward, leaving her standing in ankle-deep dirt with 23 cents in her pocket and nowhere to go. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times on the 3-day journey from Kansas City. Shoulders back, chin level, voice steady. She was a school teacher, certified and trained, and this town, according to the advertisement she'd answered, desperately needed one. The letter had been formal, almost pleading. Educator required immediately. Room and board provided. Inquire at Ridgeway General Store. The general store squatted at the end of the street like a toad, its paint peeling in long gray strips. Clara walked toward it, feeling eyes on her from every shadow, every doorway. Men stopped talking when she passed. Women pulled their children closer. By the time she reached the store's steps, her rehearsed confidence had started to crack. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco, leather, and something vaguely rotten. A man stood behind the counter, his gut pressing against a stained apron, his eyes already dismissive before she even opened her mouth. "I'm here about the teaching position," Clara said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I have credentials from positions filled." The words landed like a slap. Clara blinked. "I don't understand. The advertisement ran just 2 weeks ago. I traveled 3 days. And I'm telling you, it's filled." The man turned away, arranging jars on a shelf with deliberate slowness. "Try the boarding house down the street. Maybe they got work." Clara's fingers tightened on her bag. The advertisement specified room and board, a formal contract. I responded immediately with my qualifications. "Listen, miss." He turned back, and his face held the particular cruelty of a man who enjoyed delivering bad news. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but we got a teacher. Young man from St. Louis. Been here a week already. Now, if you got business to conduct, I'm happy to help. If not, I got actual customers waiting." There were no other customers. Clara stood there, feeling the floor tilt beneath her feet. She'd spent her last $18 on the journey here. The advertisement had been real. She'd held it in her hands, read it a dozen times. Someone had written those words, made those promises. And now this man was looking at her like she was a beggar who'd wandered in off the street. "Who placed the advertisement?" she asked quietly. "Don't know. Don't care." He went back to his jars. "Boarding house is 2 buildings down, purple door, can't miss it." Clara turned and walked out. The sun hit her face like a furnace blast. She stood on the steps looking down the street at a purple door that seemed miles away and felt something inside her chest begin to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. Like ice on a river in early spring. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Talbot, who had a face like a dried apple and eyes that calculated worth down to the penny. She looked Clara up and down, taking in the decent dress, the clean hands, the carpet bag with its frayed corners. "Rooms are $4 a week," Mrs. Talbot said, in advance. "I'm looking for work," Clara replied. "I'm a certified teacher. I was told there was a position. Teacher job went to Henry Birch's nephew. Boy's got family here. You got family?" "No." "Then you got nothing." Mrs. Talbot started to close the door. "Try the saloon. They always need girls." "I'm not that kind of girl." Mrs. Talbot's laugh was harsh and knowing. "Honey, you're whatever kind of girl keeps you fed. That's how it works out here. You'll figure it out or you'll die figuring it out." The door closed. Clara stood on the porch, feeling the afternoon heat pressing down on her skull like a hand. 23 cents. That's what separated her from complete destitution. 23 cents and a teaching certificate that nobody wanted. She tried 4 more places that afternoon. The saloon didn't need girls. They had plenty. The dry goods store had a daughter who handled all the work. The blacksmith laughed in her face. The doctor's office was run by a man who told her, not unkindly, that he couldn't afford help, and even if he could, no decent woman should be handling men's bodies the way medicine required. By sunset, Clara was sitting on a bench outside the closed post office, watching the sky turn the color of a bruise. Her stomach had moved past hunger into a hollow ache that made her dizzy. She had nowhere to sleep, No money for food, no prospects. And the temperature was already dropping, the prairie wind cutting through her dress like she was naked. She thought about her father's face when she'd told him she was leaving Philadelphia. The disappointment, the anger, the final words. "You walk out that door, Clara. You do it alone. Don't come crawling back when the world chews you up." She couldn't go back. Wouldn't. Even if she had the money for a ticket, which she didn't, she'd rather die out here in the dirt than prove him right. "You the teacher?" Clara's head snapped up. A man stood in the street, tall, lean, wearing a duster coat that had seen better decades. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see a beard dark and unkempt, and eyes that seemed to be looking through her rather than at her. "I was supposed to be," Clara said carefully. She didn't stand, didn't know if she should. The man took a step closer. He moved like someone who'd been hurt badly and learned to compensate. A slight hitch in his left leg, a careful distribution of weight. "Heard you been asking around, making a scene at the general store." "I made no scene. I simply inquired about Ridgeway don't want a woman teacher." He said it flat, factual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Town council decided last month. Too many complications, too much risk. Man teachers don't cause trouble." Clara felt her jaw tighten. "And what complications do I cause exactly?" "You're standing, you're talking, you're breathing." The man's voice held no malice, just tired observation. "That's enough for most men around here to start fighting over you or trying to break you. Council figured it wasn't worth the hassle." "Then why did they place the advertisement?" "They didn't." The man shifted his weight. "I did." Silence. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters on the post office. Clara stared at the stranger, trying to understand what game he was playing. "I don't understand," she said finally. "I need a teacher, town don't. So I placed the ad myself, but I didn't place it for Ridgeway." He gestured vaguely east. "I got a ranch, 10 miles out. Run about 40 head of cattle, got 6 men working the land. None of them can read. Most can't write their own names. I need someone to teach them." Clara's mind raced. "You want me to teach ranch hands?" "That's the offer." "In exchange for what?" "Room, board, $30 a month." $30? Clara's breath caught. That was more than she'd expected from the school position, more than she'd made in 3 months at the Philadelphia Girls Academy before they let her go for having radical ideas about women's education. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care if your ranch hands can read?" The man was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm tired of men dying stupid. Dying because they can't read a label on a medicine bottle, can't write a letter to family, can't do basic arithmetic and get cheated out of their wages. I'm tired of watching good men stay ignorant because nobody ever gave them a chance." There was something in his voice, a weight, a history, that made Clara believe him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Holt." "And you own this ranch?" "Own the land, pay the men, run the operation." Clara studied him. He was older than she'd first thought. Maybe 40, maybe older. The kind of man who'd been weathered down to essentials. No excess, no softness, just bone and purpose and scars. "Why me?" she pressed. "You could have found someone in town. A man, like the council wanted." "Tried that 3 times. First one drank. Second one couldn't handle the isolation. Third one tried to cheat my men at cards, and I had to run him off before they killed him." Caleb's expression didn't change. "I need someone who won't quit. Someone with something to prove. Someone who's got more pride than sense." "And you think that's me?" "I think you got 23 cents in your pocket, nowhere to sleep tonight, and enough stubbornness to sit on this bench until you freeze rather than beg." His eyes met hers. "Am I wrong?" Clara's throat tightened. She hated that he was right, hated that he'd read her so easily. "The ranch is 10 miles from town," Caleb continued. "You'd be the only woman. The men are rough, the work is hard, the land is harder. You'd have a room in the main house separate from the bunkhouse. I'd expect you to teach in the evenings after the men finish work. 3 nights a week, 2 hours each. Rest of the time is yours to do as you please, long as you don't cause trouble." "And if I do cause trouble?" "Then you walk back to town." Simple. Final. Clara looked down at her hands. They were shaking slightly. From cold or fear or hunger, she couldn't tell. I'd be completely isolated, dependent on you for everything, one woman among strange men. You understand how that sounds? I do. And you
This
expect me
story
to
was
just trust
posted
you?
on the channel west of
Caleb was
Betrayal.
quiet.
Please
Then
do
he
not
reached into his
repost it
coat
in
and
any
pulled out a
form.
folded piece of paper. He handed it to Clara. She opened it carefully. It was a contract written in careful script, outlining terms of employment: room, board, $30 per month, duration of 6 months with option to renew. At the bottom, a line for her signature and his. You don't have to trust me, Caleb said, but I'm the only offer you got, and it's dark in about an hour. Clara read the contract twice. Her hands had stopped shaking. The words were clear, formal, legally binding. It was more than she'd expected, more than anyone else had offered. She thought about the purple door at the boarding house, Mrs. Talbot's cold calculation, the saloon, the endless prairie stretching in every direction, swallowing women who had nowhere else to go. I need a pen, Clara said. Caleb produced one from his pocket. Clara signed her name with the same careful precision she'd used on every document since she was 15 years old. Clara Jane Whitmore. When she handed the contract back, Caleb signed it too, then folded it and put it back in his coat. Wagon's at the end of the street, he said. We leave in 10 minutes. Bring everything you got. Clara stood. Her legs were stiff from sitting, her body exhausted from fear and hunger and the crushing weight of the day. But she picked up her carpet bag and followed Caleb Holt down the dirt street toward a wagon that would take her away from this town, away from civilization, away from everything she'd ever known. She didn't look back. The ranch appeared out of the darkness like something conjured from nightmares. Clara had expected buildings, a house, a barn, the usual structures of a working ranch. What she saw instead was a compound that seemed to be at war with the land itself. The main house was a long, low structure built from rough timber and river stone. Its windows shuttered tight, its roof a patchwork of repairs. Beyond it, the bunkhouse crouched like a barracks, smoke rising from its chimney. A barn that leaned slightly to the left, corrals that looked held together more by prayer than nails. And everywhere, the wind. It never stopped. Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt near the main house. He climbed down without offering to help Clara, which she appreciated more than chivalry. She didn't need help. She needed to understand where she'd landed. Kitchen's through that door, Caleb said, pointing. Get yourself some food. I'll show you your room after. Inside, the house was warmer than Clara expected, but just as rough. The kitchen was functional, a wood stove, a scarred table, shelves lined with tin plates and cups. A pot of something sat on the stove, still warm. Clara didn't wait for permission. She found a bowl, filled it with what looked like venison stew, and ate standing up, too hungry for manners. Caleb watched from the doorway. When did you eat last? Yesterday morning. Clara didn't look up from the bowl. Kansas City. He grunted. Disappeared. Came back with bread. Set it on the table without comment. Clara ate 3 pieces. The food settled in her stomach like ballast, steadying her. When she finally looked up, Caleb was pouring coffee into 2 cups. Men'll be in from the range tomorrow, he said. I'll introduce you then, give you tonight to settle. What should I expect? Caleb handed her a cup. Resistance. They didn't ask for a teacher. Most of them think readings for rich men and preachers. They'll test you, try to run you off. Some of them won't even show up. And if they don't, then they don't get paid. Clara's eyebrows rose. You're going to force them to learn? I'm going to give them a choice. Learn and stay, or leave and find work somewhere else. Caleb's voice was flat. I made it clear when I hired you. This is happening. They can fight it or they can benefit from it. Don't much care which. Clara sipped her coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint. You're a hard man, Mr. Holt. I'm a practical man, and out here, that's the same thing. He showed her to her room, a small space off the main hallway with a bed, a dresser, a chair, and a window that looked out onto nothing but darkness. Clean sheets. A quilt that looked hand-stitched, an oil lamp on the dresser. Bolts on the inside of the door, Caleb said. Use it. Nobody'll bother you, but use it anyway. And if someone does bother me? Caleb's expression didn't change. Then I'll handle it. He left. Clara stood in the center of the small room, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Then she closed the door and threw the bolt. She set her carpet bag on the chair, looked around at the four walls that would be her home for the next 6 months, and felt something unexpected wash over her. Relief. She was alone. She was safe. She had food in her stomach and a roof over her head, and a contract that said she'd be paid for her work. It wasn't Philadelphia. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she got her teaching certificate, but it was hers. Earned through desperation and gambling on a stranger's offer and refusing to give up even when every door slammed shut. Clara sat on the bed. It was harder than she expected, the mattress thin and lumpy, but it was a bed. She could hear the wind outside, rattling the shutters, howling across the prairie. Inside, the lamp flickered. The house creaked. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. She didn't cry. She'd stopped crying 3 states ago when she realized tears changed nothing. Instead, she unpacked her carpet bag with methodical precision. 3 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small book of poetry her mother had given her before she died, her teaching materials, a primer, a grammar text, a notebook filled with lesson plans she'd developed in Philadelphia. Everything she owned fit on a single dresser with room to spare. Clara changed into her nightdress, washed her face in the basin, and climbed into bed. The mattress protested. The quilt smelled like lavender and dust. Through the thin walls, she could hear Caleb moving around the house, footsteps, a door closing, the sound of water being poured. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about tomorrow, about meeting the men who would be her students, about standing in front of rough, illiterate ranch hands and trying to teach them something they didn't want to learn, about being the only woman in a place where isolation could mean death and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Sleep came slowly, fitfully, broken by dreams of doors slamming and streets made of dust and a voice that kept saying, "You got nothing, you got nothing, you got nothing," until she woke with a start, gasping, to find gray light creeping through the window. Morning had come, and with it, her real test. The men gathered in front of the bunkhouse like soldiers waiting for inspection, 6 of them, ranging from barely 20 to well past 50, all of them looking at Clara with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Caleb stood to the side, arms crossed, watching but not interfering. Clara stood on the porch of the main house, feeling their eyes on her. She'd dressed carefully that morning, her most severe dress, her hair pulled back tight, her posture straight as a rifle barrel. She looked like a schoolmarm from a children's book, which is exactly what she'd intended. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the yard, "my name is Clara Whitmore. I'm here to teach you to read and write." Silence. Then one of the men, a tall, raw-boned cowboy with a scar across his cheek, laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Lady, I ain't read a book in my life, and I ain't about to start now." "Then you won't be working here much longer," Clara replied evenly. "Mr. Holt was clear. Attendance is mandatory, 3 nights a week, 2 hours each session. If you choose not to participate, you choose not to work here." The scarred man's face darkened. "The hell I do. Caleb, you gonna let this— I told you the terms when I hired you, Roy." Caleb's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. "Nothing's changed. You want to work here? You learn. You don't want to learn? There's other ranches." Roy's jaw worked. He looked at Clara with naked hatred. "This is horseshit." "Your vocabulary could certainly use expansion," Clara said coolly. "I look forward to helping with that." One of the younger men snorted, quickly suppressed when Roy's glare swung toward him. Clara watched the dynamics play out, cataloging relationships, power structures, alliances. Roy was clearly the alpha of this group. If she lost him, she'd lose most of the others. "First session is tonight," Clara continued, 7 o'clock in the main house. "Bring nothing but yourselves. I'll provide all materials." "And if we don't show?" Roy challenged. "Then you don't get paid this week." Caleb's voice was flat, final. "That clear enough for you?" The men shifted, muttering among themselves. Clara saw the calculation in their eyes. They needed the money. They hated the idea of being taught by a woman. The 2 facts were at war in their heads. "We'll see who shows up," Roy said finally. He spat in the dirt and walked away. The other men followed, some hesitant, some eager to escape. When they were gone, Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding.
This story was
That went
posted
well,
on the channel
Caleb
west
said
of
dryly.
Betrayal.
They hate me.
Please do not repost
They don't know
it in
you
any
yet.
form.
Hate comes later. Clara looked at him sharply, but his expression was unreadable. You're not exactly inspiring confidence. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to back you up. Caleb nodded toward the main house. You got until 7 o'clock to figure out how to handle Roy. He shows, the others will follow. He doesn't. You lost before you started. And how do you suggest I handle him? I don't. That's your job. Caleb turned away. You wanted to be a teacher, so teach. He walked toward the barn, leaving Clara standing alone in the yard. Above her, clouds were gathering, dark, heavy, promising rain. The wind picked up, colder now, carrying the smell of distant water and cattle and something else, something wild. Clara went inside. She had 8 hours to prepare for a battle she had no idea how to win. At 7 o'clock, Clara stood in what Caleb had called the teaching room, a cleared space in the main house with a long table, benches, and a blackboard that looked like it had survived a war. She'd laid out 6 slates, 6 pieces of chalk, and 6 primers she'd brought from Philadelphia. The room was lit by oil lamps that threw long shadows across the walls. The door opened. One of the younger men came in, the one who'd snorted at her earlier. He was maybe 22, with sandy hair and a face that hadn't quite lost its boyish roundness. Name's Tommy, he said, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Figure I might as well see what this is about. Thank you for coming, Tommy. Clara kept her voice neutral, professional. 2 more men filtered in over the next 10 minutes. An older man named Marcus, who moved stiffly, arthritis in his hands. A quiet, dark-haired man named Jesse, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Both sat as far from Clara as the room allowed. 7:15. No Roy. No sign of the other 3 men. Clara waited until 7:20. Then she closed the door and faced her 3 students. Gentlemen, she said quietly, I know you don't want to be here. I know you think this is a waste of your time. I know you'd rather be in the bunkhouse playing cards or sleeping or doing literally anything else. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. Marcus's face remained impassive. Jesse stared at the table. But you're here, Clara continued, and that takes courage. Because learning something new, especially something you've been told your whole life you're too stupid or too poor or too rough to learn, that's terrifying. It's easier to stay ignorant, easier to pretend you don't need it, easier to mock the people who try. She picked up a piece of chalk, wrote her name on the blackboard in clear, careful letters. Clara Whitmore. I'm not here to judge you, she said, turning back to face them. I'm not here to make you feel small. I'm here because, Mr. Holt believes you deserve better than what you've been given, and I happen to agree with him. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice rough as gravel. Lady, I'm 53 years old, been working ranches since I was 12, never needed to read before. Why should I start now? Because you're 53 years old and you've been working ranches for 41 years and you've probably been cheated out of wages more times than you can count, Clara said bluntly. Because you can't read a contract, can't verify what you're owed, can't write a letter to family without paying someone else to do it, can't even read the label on a medicine bottle to know if you're taking the right dose. Marcus's jaw tightened. Hit a nerve. Good. And you, Clara looked at Jesse. How old are you? 26. His voice was barely above a whisper. You ever want to do anything besides ranch work? Jesse's eyes flickered up, then down again. Don't matter what I want. It matters if you can read, if you can write, if you can do arithmetic and manage money and understand the world beyond this ranch. Clara's voice softened slightly. It matters because knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you once you have it. Silence. Heavy. Loaded with 40 years of shame and 26 years of being told you're not good enough, and 3 hours of terror at the idea that maybe, just maybe, something could change. Then Tommy said, So how do we start? Clara smiled, small, real. We start with your names. For the next hour and 40 minutes, Clara taught them the alphabet. Not by rote memorization, not by drill and repetition, but by writing their own names. Tommy learned Tommy, Marcus learned Marcus. Jesse, hesitant at first, learned Jesse. They wrote on the slates, erased, wrote again. Clara moved between them, correcting angles, praising progress, never dwelling on mistakes. By the time 9 o'clock came, all three men could write their full names. "Tomorrow night," Clara said as they stood to leave. "We'll learn to read them." Tommy grinned. "Didn't think it'd be like this." "Like what?" "Fun." He shrugged, embarrassed. "I thought it'd be like punishment or something." "Learning should never be punishment," Clara said. "It should be power." They left. Clara stood alone in the teaching room, looking at the blackboard covered in chalk dust and the hesitant, shaky letters of grown men learning to write their names for the first time. Something in her chest loosened. Not victory, not yet, but possibility. The door opened. Caleb stood in the doorway. 3 out of 6, he said. "That's a start." Roy didn't show. "Roy's got pride, give him time." Clara began gathering the slates. "What if he doesn't come? What if he convinces the others not to come?" "Then you adapt." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "You did good tonight." Clara looked at him sharply. It was the first compliment he'd given her. "How do you know? You weren't here." "I was listening from the hall." He pushed off the doorframe. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be harder." He left. Clara finished cleaning up, then stood for a long moment looking at the empty room. 3 out of 6, 50%. In Philadelphia, that would have been failure. Out here, in this rough place with these hard men, it felt like survival. She blew out the lamps and walked to her room. Outside, the rain had finally come. A steady drumming on the roof, soaking into the thirsty land. Clara undressed, climbed into bed, and listened to the water falling. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Roy was probably organizing resistance. Somewhere, the other men who hadn't shown up were making calculations about pride versus pay. Somewhere, Caleb Holt was doing whatever mysterious things ranch owners did in the middle of the night. And here, in this small room, with its thin mattress and lavender-scented quilt, Clara Whitmore closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for a moment, that she might actually survive this. Maybe even succeed. The rain fell harder, the wind howled, and Clara, for the first time in weeks, slept soundly. The second week brought ice. Clara woke to find frost patterns crawling across her window like skeletal fingers, and when she stepped outside to wash her face at the pump, the water came out so cold it burned her hands. The men moved through their morning routines like shadows, breath steaming in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces hidden beneath hats pulled low against the wind that came screaming down from the north with nothing to stop it. 4 men had shown up for the second session: Tommy, Marcus, Jesse, and to Clara's surprise, a rail-thin cowboy named Pete, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He'd slipped in late, taken a seat in the back corner, and spent the entire 2 hours watching Clara's hands as she wrote on the blackboard, his eyes tracking each letter like he was memorizing a map to buried treasure. Roy still hadn't come. Neither had the other two, a burly ox of a man named Dutch and a younger cowboy everyone called Spider for reasons Clara didn't want to know. But 4 was better than 3. 4 was progress. "They're talking about you in the bunkhouse," Tommy said one evening after class, lingering by the door while the others filed out into the cold. His face was red, embarrassed, like he was betraying some sacred confidence. Clara looked up from collecting slates. "What are they saying?" "Roy says you're playing us. Says women like you always got an angle." Tommy shrugged. "Says you'll quit when it gets hard. Says teaching ain't real work, and you're just here to cause trouble till you find some rich man to marry or run back to whatever fancy city you crawled out of." "And what do you think?" Tommy's face got redder. "I think Roy's scared." "Of me?" "Of looking stupid, of being wrong, of, I don't know, change maybe?" Tommy turned his hat in his hands. "He's been top hand here for 8 years, runs the crew. Men listen to him, but he can't read his own name and everyone knows it. That eats at him." "What?" Clara set down the slates carefully. "What's your angle, Tommy? Why are you here?" "Because I don't want to die on this ranch." The words came out fierce, almost angry. "I seen what happens to men who got nothing but their backs and their hands. They break. They get old. They die in some bunkhouse somewhere with nothing to show for it but calluses and scars. I want more than that. He struggled for the words. I want to be someone. You already are someone. You know what I mean.
This story
Clara
was
did.
posted on the
She
channel
saw it
West
in his
of
eyes.
Betrayal.
That
Please
same
do not
desperate
repost
hunger
it
she'd
in
felt
any
her
form.
entire life. The need to be more than what the world said you could be, to break free of the box people tried to nail you into. Keep showing up, she said quietly. Keep learning. That's how you become who you want to be. Tommy nodded and left. Clara stood alone in the teaching room, feeling the weight of 4 men's hopes pressing down on her shoulders like stones. The next morning, she found a dead rat nailed to her door. She stared at it for a long moment. The small, broken body pinned through the belly, blood dried black on the wood, its tiny teeth bared in a frozen snarl. A message. A warning. We can hurt you. We can make this unbearable. Clara's hand shook as she pulled the nail free and threw the rat into the bushes. She scrubbed the blood off the door with a rag and water so hot it scalded her fingers. Caleb appeared while she was still scrubbing, his face unreadable in the early light. Roy? He asked. I don't know. Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. Could be anyone. You want me to handle it? No. Clara threw the bloody rag aside. If you fight my battles, I've already lost. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You're tougher than you look. I have to be. Clara met his eyes. Out here, tough is the only thing that matters. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned and walked toward the barn, and Clara went inside to teach herself not to be afraid. That night, all 6 men showed up. They filed into the teaching room in silence, Tommy and Marcus and Jesse and Pete, and behind them, moving like wolves, Dutch and Spider. They took their seats. They stared at Clara with faces carved from stone. And then Roy walked in. He didn't sit. He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his scarred face expressionless. But he was there, present, watching. Clara felt something shift in the air, a challenge, a test, a moment where everything could tip one way or another depending on what she did next. She could call him out, demand he sit, assert authority she didn't really have. Or she could ignore him and teach anyway. Clara chose the third option. Gentlemen, she said, her voice calm, tonight we're going to talk about power. That got their attention. Even Roy's eyes sharpened. Clara picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a single word on the blackboard. Ownership. Every man in this room works hard, she continued, turning to face them. You break your backs. You bleed. You risk your lives for $30 a month and a bunk in a shared room. You make other men rich while you stay poor. Why? Silence. Suspicious. Waiting for the trap. Because you can't read a contract, Clara said bluntly. Can't verify what you're owed. Can't negotiate terms because you don't understand the words. Can't prove you've been cheated because you can't read the receipts. You're dependent on other people's honesty, and how often has that worked out for you? Marcus shifted in his seat. Dutch's jaw tightened, even Roy's arms uncrossed slightly. Reading isn't about books or poetry or culture, Clara went on. Out here, reading is power. It's the difference between getting paid what you're worth and getting robbed, between knowing your rights and getting trampled, between being a man who owns his life and being a man who's owned by everyone else. She let that sit for a moment. Then she pointed at the word on the blackboard. This is ownership of your wages, your future, your choices, and the only way to get it is to stop being afraid of looking stupid and start learning. More silence, but different now, thoughtful, hungry. Show of hands, Clara said. How many of you have been cheated out of wages? Every hand went up, even Roy's. How many of you knew you were being cheated but couldn't prove it? The hand stayed up. How many of you would do just about anything to make sure it never happens again? The hands didn't move. 6 men, 6 raised hands, 6 faces full of rage and shame, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. Clara set down the chalk. Then let's get to work. For the next 2 hours she taught them numbers. Not abstract mathematics, but practical arithmetic. How to add columns of figures. How to calculate percentages. How to read a wage slip and verify the math. She used real examples, the price of cattle, the cost of supplies, the breakdown of a monthly salary. She showed them how ranch owners kept books, how merchants calculated credit, how easy it was to hide theft in numbers if the other person couldn't check your work. And they learned, fast. Because this wasn't theoretical, this was survival. Even Roy moved closer as the lesson progressed, until he was standing just behind Dutch's shoulder, watching the blackboard with fierce concentration. He didn't sit, didn't participate, but he watched, and that was enough. When Clara finally dismissed them at 9 o'clock, the men didn't leave immediately. They stayed clustered around the table, checking each other's work, arguing about calculations, helping each other find mistakes. It was the first time Clara had seen them act like a unit instead of 6 separate islands of suspicion. Tommy caught her eye as he left. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, sharp and certain, and Clara understood. "We're with you. Keep going." The room emptied. Clara stood alone, looking at the blackboard covered in numbers and half-erased calculations, and felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Not quite triumph, not yet, but the shape of it, the possibility. That was smart. Clara turned. Roy stood in the doorway, his face still hard, still unreadable. "Teaching them to protect themselves," he continued, "not teaching them to be educated. Big difference." "Is there?" Clara asked carefully. "Out here?" "Yeah." Roy stepped into the room. He moved like a man who'd been in too many fights and won most of them, economical, controlled, ready for violence at any second. Education's for people who got time to waste. Protection's for people who need to survive. "And which do you need?" Roy's eyes narrowed. "You asking if I'm going to join your little schoolroom?" "I'm asking if you're tired of being cheated." For a long moment, Roy just stared at her. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and held it out. Clara took it. It was a wage slip from 2 years ago, signed by some previous ranch owner, covered in numbers that made no sense. The totals didn't add up. The deductions were inflated. Even Clara, who wasn't a mathematician, could see the theft buried in the columns. "Can't prove it was wrong," Roy said quietly. "Can't even tell you what half these words mean. But I know I worked 70-hour weeks that month and came away with $12. I know that math don't work. I just can't—" He stopped, swallowed. "I can't show anyone why." Clara looked at the wage slip, then at Roy's face. Beneath the hardness, beneath the scars and the carefully constructed armor, she saw what Tommy had seen. Fear. Not of looking stupid. Fear of staying powerless. "Bring this to the next session," Clara said, handing the slip back. "We'll break it down together. Figure out exactly how much they stole from you." Roy folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. He looked at Clara for another long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not softness, not trust, but a crack in the wall. "If you're running some kind of game," he said slowly, "if you're here to make fools of us or use us or cause trouble for Caleb, I'll know, and I'll make you regret it." "Fair enough," Clara replied, "but I'm not." "We'll see." He left. Clara stood in the empty room, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly with adrenaline. She'd just faced down the man who'd probably nailed a dead rat to her door, and instead of backing down, she'd pushed forward, offered help, refused to be intimidated. And it had worked. Caleb found her 20 minutes later, still standing in the teaching room, staring at nothing. "Roy talked to you," he said. "Not a question." "How did you know?" "Because he didn't burn the place down." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "That's progress." Clara laughed. It came out shaky, half hysterical. "Your standards are impressively low." "Out here they have to be." Caleb's expression didn't change. "You did good tonight. Gave them something to care about. That's more than the last 3 teachers managed. The ones who drank and cheated at cards? And the one who tried to teach them poetry." Caleb's mouth twitched. That lasted 2 days before Roy threw him in the water trough. Clara sat down heavily on one of the benches. The exhaustion was catching up to her now, bone deep, soul-crushing, the kind of tired that came from running on fear and stubbornness for too long. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. "You're already doing it." "I mean long-term. 6 months, every night, fighting for their attention, their respect, their basic willingness to show up." Clara looked at her hands. They were stained with chalk dust, the nails broken and ragged. What if I fail? What if they quit? What if... Then you adapt. Caleb pushed off the doorframe and crossed to where she sat.
This
He lowered
story was
himself onto
posted
the
on the
bench
channel
beside her,
west of
moving
Betrayal.
carefully,
Please do
favoring
not
that bad
repost
leg.
it in any form.
Failure is just information. Tells you what doesn't work so you can try something else. Easy for you to say. This isn't your entire future riding on 6 stubborn cowboys learning to read. No. It's my ranch riding on 6 stubborn cowboys becoming more than just bodies that lift things. Caleb's voice was quiet but intense. You think I don't have skin in this? I need them sharp. I need them capable. I need them to stop dying stupid. So yeah, your success is my success. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. Clara looked at him. Really looked. In the lamplight, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his beard, the scars that marked his hands and face. A hard man, a practical man, but not a cruel one. Why do you care so much, she asked, about them learning? Most ranch owners would just hire new men when the old ones broke. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I had a brother, younger, good man, hard worker. But he couldn't read. Got sick one winter, took the wrong medicine because he couldn't read the label, died in 3 days. His voice was flat, factual, but Clara heard the weight beneath it. Could have been prevented, should have been, but he didn't know, and by the time someone realized, it was too late. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, be effective. Caleb stood. That's all anyone can be out here. Effective or dead. He left. Clara sat in the empty teaching room, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling the cold seep through the walls. Effective or dead. Those were the choices. Nothing in between. No room for doubt or weakness or the luxury of giving up. She thought about the men. Roy with his crumpled wage slip. Tommy with his desperate hunger for something more. Marcus with his arthritic hands still learning to grip a pencil. Jesse, who barely spoke but showed up every night anyway. Pete and Dutch and Spider, who watched and waited and slowly, cautiously, began to believe. She thought about Caleb's brother, about all the brothers and fathers and sons who died stupid, died preventable, died because nobody ever taught them the basic tools to survive. And she thought about herself. Clara Whitmore, failed teacher from Philadelphia, standing in the dirt outside the Ridgeway General Store with 23 cents and nowhere to go. She'd gambled everything on a stranger's offer, had walked into the wilderness with nothing but pride and desperation. And somehow, impossibly, she was winning. Clara stood and began cleaning up the teaching room. She wiped down the blackboard, stacked the slates, straightened the benches. Small acts of order in a chaotic world. When everything was tidy, she blew out the lamps and walked to her room. The bolt slid home with a satisfying click. Clara changed into her nightdress, climbed into bed, and lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, 6 men were probably arguing about numbers or practicing their letters or plotting new ways to test her limits. Let them plot. Let them test. She'd face it tomorrow the same way she'd faced it today, with stubborn refusal to quit and a determination to prove that education wasn't a luxury for rich men, but a weapon for anyone smart enough to pick it up. The days began to blur together after that, a rhythm of teaching and testing and small, hard-won victories. Roy started sitting in the back row, still silent, still watchful, but present every single night. They broke down his wage slip together, and when the numbers proved he'd been cheated out of nearly $60 over 6 months, his face went white with rage. But it was focused rage now, directed. He started learning arithmetic with the intensity of a man preparing for war. Tommy progressed faster than anyone. Within 3 weeks, he could read simple sentences and write basic correspondence. He started carrying a small notebook everywhere, jotting down thoughts, observations, half-formed ideas that he'd share with Clara after class. She began teaching him grammar beyond the basics, showing him how to structure arguments, how to make words work for him instead of against him. Marcus struggled. His hands cramped, his eyes watered from squinting at the blackboard, and more than once Clara found him in the teaching room after class, alone, practicing letters over and over until they looked right. He was the oldest, the slowest, the most frustrated. But he never missed a session, never complained, just kept grinding forward with the same grim determination he probably brought to every other impossible task in his life. Jesse remained a mystery. He learned quickly when he bothered to engage, but most nights he seemed to be fighting some internal battle Clara couldn't see. He'd write a sentence, then cross it out. Start again, cross it out again. His face would go tight with something that looked like pain, and he'd shove the slate away and sit in silence until the session ended. Clara tried talking to him after class one night. Jesse, if something's bothering you, nothing's bothering me. His voice was too sharp, too quick. If the work is too hard, we can... It ain't the work. Jesse stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the bench. It's just... Why does it matter? Why do I need to read when everything I read is just... It's just reminders that the world's a piece of shit and I'm stuck in it. Clara blinked. What have you been reading? Jesse pulled a crumpled newspaper from his pocket, threw it on the table. It was 3 months old, stained and torn, but Clara could make out the headlines. Mine collapse. 20 dead. Factory fire. Children burned. Stock market panic. Families ruined. That's what reading gets you, Jesse said bitterly. News that the world's falling apart, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. Or, Clara said carefully, reading gets you the information you need to avoid mines that collapse and factories that burn. Gets you the ability to understand stock markets before you invest. Gets you the power to make choices instead of being chosen for. Pretty words, Jesse grabbed the newspaper. But words don't stop buildings from falling or children from dying. No, but they might stop you from being inside when it happens. Clara met his eyes. Information is survival, Jesse. The more you know, the better choices you can make. That's not nothing. Jesse stared at her. Then he folded the newspaper and put it back in his pocket. Maybe, he said, and left. Clara stood alone in the teaching room, troubled. She'd assumed all the men wanted the same thing, basic literacy, economic survival, a way to stop being cheated. But Jesse wanted something else, something bigger and more dangerous. He wanted meaning, purpose, a reason for all the suffering. And Clara had no idea how to give him that. She mentioned it to Caleb the next morning while they were in the barn. He was checking supplies, making lists of what needed to be ordered for winter. Clara had started helping with the paperwork, another way to prove her value, to make herself indispensable. Jesse's always been like that, Caleb said, not looking up from his inventory. Angry at everything. Hurts in ways I can't see or fix. What happened to him? Don't know. Don't ask. Men come out here to escape something. They got a right to their privacy. But if I knew, maybe I could help. You're not his mother. You're his teacher. Caleb finally looked at her. Teach him to read. That's all you can do. The rest is his to figure out. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the harsh pragmatism that seemed to govern every interaction out here. But she'd learned enough about Caleb to know when he'd set a boundary. So she nodded and went back to checking inventory numbers. They worked in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, "You're getting better at this." At what? Functioning, out here. You don't jump at every sound anymore. Don't flinch when the men curse. Don't look like you're about to break every time something goes wrong. Clara smiled slightly. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Well, your observations could use some work on delivery. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. You want pretty compliments. Go back to Philadelphia. Philadelphia doesn't want me. I'm too difficult. Out here, difficult is a virtue. They finished the inventory. Caleb headed out to deal with a fence that had collapsed in the night, and Clara went back to the house to prepare for the evening's lesson. She was planning to introduce reading comprehension, moving beyond basic literacy into actual understanding of written text. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but the men were ready. She could feel it. That night, she brought in a collection of practical documents, a deed to property, a medical instruction sheet, a contract for cattle sale, a letter written by a ranch hand to his family. She divided the men into pairs and had them work together to decode the documents, figure out what they meant, identify important information. The room filled with muttered conversations, arguments about word meanings, triumphant discoveries when someone figured out a particularly tricky phrase. Roy and Dutch worked together on the cattle contract, their heads bent close, fingers tracing lines of text. Tommy and Pete tackled the medical instructions, sounding out unfamiliar words with increasing confidence. Marcus and Jesse got the deed, and for the first time Clara saw Jesse engage fully, his sharp mind cutting through legal language like a knife. "This is a trap," Jesse said suddenly, pointing at a clause buried in the middle of the deed. "Right here.
This
Says the
story
buyer
was
gets
posted
mineral
on the
rights in
channel west
perpetuity."
of Betrayal.
Most people wouldn't
Please
notice
do not
that.
repost it
They think
in
they're
any
buying
form.
the whole property, but they're not. Someone else owns what's underneath. "How'd you catch that?" Marcus asked, squinting at the document. "Because it's written to be missed." Jesse's voice was intense, focused. "That's what these things do. They hide the truth in words people don't understand so they can steal from you legal-like." Clara watched him come alive, watched his anger transform into analytical precision, and suddenly understood. Jesse didn't need meaning or purpose. He needed targets, enemies he could fight with the weapons she was giving him. "You're absolutely right," she said, walking over to their table. "That clause is designed to deceive, but now that you can read it, now that you understand how these contracts work, you can protect yourself. You can protect others." Jesse looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his face held something other than bitterness. It held possibility. The session ended. The men filed out, still arguing about the documents, about what they'd discovered, about implications and meanings, and ways they'd been fooled in the past. Clara started cleaning up, and Roy lingered behind. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Clara turned. "Of course." "Why are you really here?" Roy's voice was quiet but direct. "And don't give me that line about teaching being noble or whatever. Nobody comes to a place like this unless they're running from something or got nowhere else to go." "Which is it?" Clara considered lying, considered deflecting, but she'd asked these men to be vulnerable with her, to risk looking stupid, to trust her with their futures. She owed them honesty. "Both," she said. "I had nowhere else to go, and I was running from a life that wanted to make me small." "Small how?" "Small like acceptable, quiet, ornamental. The kind of woman who teaches rich girls how to do needlepoint and write thank you notes and never ever challenge anything or anyone." Clara's voice hardened. "I wanted to actually teach, to make a difference, and they hated me for it." Roy nodded slowly. "So you came here to prove something?" "I came here to survive. The proving is just a bonus. And when you've proved it? When we can all read and write and do arithmetic? When your 6 months are up?" Roy's eyes were sharp. "You gonna leave? Go back to civilization? Find some easier job teaching kids who actually want to learn?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it. She didn't have an answer, hadn't let herself think that far ahead. "I don't know," she said finally. "Fair enough." Roy turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you're doing good here. Better than I expected. Better than I wanted to admit." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Winter's coming. Things get harder when the cold sets in. We'll see if you're still standing come spring." He left. Clara stood alone in the teaching room, feeling the weight of his words. Winter was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way the men moved faster through their work, in the way Caleb was stockpiling supplies like preparing for siege, and she had no idea if she was ready. Winter hit like a fist. The first real storm came in late November, turning the world into a howling white void that lasted 3 days. Clara woke on the second morning to find ice crusted on the inside of her window, her breath fogging in the room despite the blankets piled on her bed. The house groaned and creaked under the weight of wind that sounded like it wanted to tear the walls apart. She dressed in layers, 2 petticoats, wool stockings, her heaviest dress, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. When she made it to the kitchen, Caleb was already there, stoking the fire, his face grim. "Storm's bad," he said without preamble. "Cattle are scattered, lost 2 head already, probably more by the time we can get out there. Men are staying in the bunkhouse till it passes." "What about lessons?" Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Clara, you can barely see 10 feet in this. Nobody's going anywhere." "Then I'll go to them." "The hell you will." His voice was sharp. "You step outside in this, you'll freeze before you make it halfway to the bunkhouse." Clara moved to the window, peered out at the white chaos. She could barely make out the shape of the barn, and the bunkhouse was completely invisible. Caleb was right. It would be suicide. But the men were expecting her. 3 nights a week, 2 hours each, that was the agreement. If she broke it now, showed them that comfort mattered more than commitment, she'd lose everything she'd built. "There's rope in the barn," she said slowly. "The kind you use to guide yourself in storms. I've seen it. That's for emergencies. This is an emergency." Clara turned to face him. "Those men are waiting for me. If I don't show up, if I let weather be an excuse, they'll know. They'll know I'm not serious, that this whole thing is just something I do when it's convenient. So let them know. Let them understand that survival comes before education. Out here, education is survival. Claire's voice was fierce. "You said it yourself. Men die stupid. Well, stupid includes not knowing when to push and when to quit, and I'm not quitting." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head, half admiration, half frustration. "You're going to get yourself killed. Then help me not get killed." He did. 20 minutes later, Clara stood in the kitchen, bundled in so many layers she could barely move, a rope tied around her waist, the other end secured to the porch railing. Caleb had wanted to come with her, but she'd refused. If she couldn't do this alone, it didn't count. The wind hit her the moment she stepped outside, a physical force that nearly knocked her backwards. Snow drove into her face like needles. She couldn't see anything, just white, just cold, just the rope in her hands and the knowledge that the bunkhouse was straight ahead, maybe 50 feet, maybe a mile. Distance had no meaning in this. She walked, one step, another. The rope grew taut behind her, and she kept going, feeling her way forward, her feet already numb, her lungs burning from air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. Somewhere in the white chaos she heard shouting. Couldn't tell if it was Caleb or the men or just the wind playing tricks. Her foot hit something solid. The bunkhouse steps. Clara grabbed the railing, pulled herself up, and pounded on the door. It opened almost immediately, and hands pulled her inside into warmth and light, and the smell of wood smoke and unwashed men. "Jesus Christ, woman," Roy's voice. "Are you insane?" Clara unwrapped the scarf from her face, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. Lesson. We have a lesson." The 6 men stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then Tommy started laughing. Not mockery. Something else, something that sounded like respect. "She walked through a blizzard for us," he said to the others. "She actually walked through a damn blizzard." "Because we had an agreement," Clara managed, her voice steadying as warmth seeped back into her limbs. 3 nights a week. Storm or no storm. Marcus moved to the stove, poured something hot into a tin cup, pressed it into Clara's shaking hands. Coffee, strong enough to strip paint, but it burned down her throat and into her chest and made her feel almost human again. "You could have died," Jessie said quietly. "But I didn't." Clara set down the cup. "Now, who wants to learn how to read a weather almanac so you can predict when these storms are coming?" They learned. For 2 hours in the cramped, overheated bunkhouse, surrounded by the smell of damp wool and tobacco and 6 men who couldn't quite believe what had just happened, Clara taught them how to read meteorological data, how to interpret cloud patterns described in text, how to calculate temperature changes and predict storm severity. It wasn't the lesson she'd planned, but it was the lesson they needed. When she finally stood to leave, the storm had eased slightly. Still dangerous, still brutal, but survivable. Roy walked her back to the main house, holding the rope, guiding her through the drifts. At the porch, he stopped. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen anyone do," he said. "Thank you." And it worked. Roy's scarred face was serious. "You wanted us to take this seriously? To believe it matters?" Message received. He left. Clara went inside, stripped off her frozen layers, and sat by the fire until feeling returned to her fingers and toes. Caleb found her there an hour later, still shaking slightly, staring into the flames. "You're lucky you didn't die," he said. "I know. That was reckless and stupid, and could have ended with me finding your frozen body halfway to the bunkhouse. I know. And it was exactly what you needed to do." Caleb sat down beside her. "They're yours now. You know that, right? They'll follow you anywhere after this." Clara looked at him. "I wasn't trying to win followers. I was just trying to keep my word." "Same thing out here." Caleb's expression was unreadable. "Men respect action. You showed them you're willing to bleed for this. That's worth more than all the pretty words in the world." "I didn't bleed." "You would have." That's what matters. The storm passed. The men dug out the drifts, searched for cattle, repaired damage. Clara resumed teaching in the main house, but something had shifted. The resistance was gone. Even Spider, who'd been the most reluctant, started showing up early, asking
This
questions,
story was
pushing
posted
himself
on
to
the channel
understand
west of
concepts that had
Betrayal.
seemed impossible
Please do
weeks
not
earlier.
repost it in any
Tommy
form.
began writing, really writing, not just copying exercises or practicing penmanship, but composing actual thoughts on paper. He'd show Clara his work after lessons, observations about ranch life, descriptions of the land, fragments of stories about cowboys and cattle and the endless prairie. The writing was rough, grammatically chaotic, but it had something, a voice, a perspective. "You're good at this," Clara told him one night, reading over a piece he'd written about a horse breaking. "You have a way of seeing things that's fresh, honest." Tommy's face went red. "It's just scribbling." "No, it's not. It's storytelling, and people pay good money for storytelling if it's done well." Clara handed the pages back. "You should keep writing, get better, maybe try to get something published." "Published? Like in a newspaper?" "Why not? Plenty of papers print stories about frontier life. They eat that stuff up back east. People want to know what it's really like out here." Tommy stared at the pages like they'd transformed into gold. "You think someone would actually pay me for writing?" "I think if you keep improving, keep practicing, keep finding your voice, then yes, someone might." Clara smiled. "But that's months away, maybe years. Right now, focus on the basics. The rest will come." He left clutching those pages like they were sacred texts, and Clara felt something warm expand in her chest. This was why she taught, not for the mechanics of reading and writing, but for the moment when someone realized they could be more than the world told them they were allowed to be. But not everyone progressed smoothly. Jesse had grown increasingly withdrawn as winter deepened. He still showed up, still did the work, but he'd stopped engaging, stopped asking questions, just sat in the back, copying exercises with mechanical precision, his face closed off and distant. Clara tried to draw him out after class one evening. "Jesse, I noticed you've been quiet lately. Is the material too easy, too hard? I need to stop wasting time pretending any of this matters." His voice was flat, dead. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. That's the problem." Jesse stood abruptly. "I can read now. I can write. I can do arithmetic. And you know what's different? Nothing. I'm still stuck on this ranch, still doing the same work, still going nowhere. All you did was give me enough knowledge to see exactly how trapped I am." The words hit Clara like a slap. "That's not, save it." Jesse moved toward the door. "You mean well. I get that. But you don't understand what it's like to learn there's a whole world out there and know you'll never be part of it. That's not freedom. That's torture." He left. Claire stood frozen, his words echoing in the empty room. She'd been so focused on teaching skills, on giving these men tools to survive, that she hadn't considered what those tools might show them. The gap between what they could understand and what they could actually reach. She found Caleb in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day. "Jesse's giving up," she said without preamble. "Jesse's been giving up since before you got here." Caleb didn't look away from the horse. "Some men are built to see the worst in everything. Nothing you can do about that." There has to be something. Some way to show him that knowledge isn't a prison, it's a key? A ladder? A weapon? Caleb finally turned to face her. "Those are just metaphors, Clara. For Jesse, knowledge is exactly what he said, torture, because now he knows enough to want things he can't have." "So what? I should have left him ignorant?" "I didn't say that." Caleb's voice was patient, which somehow made it worse. "I said you can't save everyone. Can't make them see what you see. Sometimes the best you can do is teach them the skills and let them figure out what to do with them." "That's not good enough." "It has to be. Because the alternative is driving yourself crazy trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist there was a way to reach Jesse, to help him see beyond his bitterness. But Caleb was already turning back to the horse, the conversation over in his mind. She left the barn frustrated and restless. The night was clear, brutally cold, the stars so bright they looked like ice chips scattered across black cloth. Clara stood in the yard, her breath fogging, and tried to think of something, anything, that might help Jessie see possibilities instead of just limitations. The answer came 2 days later, not from Clara, but from Marcus. The old cowboy approached her after a lesson, his arthritic hands clutching a letter he'd just written. "Can you check this?" he asked gruffly. "Make sure I didn't mess it up too bad." Clara took the letter. It was addressed to Marcus's sister in St. Louis, someone he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. The handwriting was shaky, the spelling creative in places, but the message was clear. He was reaching out, trying to reconnect with family he'd lost touch with because he couldn't write. "This is beautiful, Marcus," Clara said softly. "It's chicken scratch." "No, it's you talking to someone you care about. That's what makes it beautiful." Clara handed it back. "She's going to love getting this." Marcus folded the letter carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said, about knowledge being power, about how reading changes things." He paused, choosing words carefully. "It don't change the big things. I'm still old, still broke, still going to die on some ranch somewhere, but it changes the small things, like being able to tell my sister I'm alive, that I remember her, that I ain't forgot where I came from. Those aren't small things, Marcus. Maybe not, but they ain't the big dramatic changes Jessie wants either. They're just human things, connection things." Marcus looked at her. "Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us really get." Clara stood there, holding those words, and suddenly understood what she'd been missing. She'd been teaching the men to read and write as a means to an end: economic survival, self-protection, advancement. But for most of them, the real power wasn't in what literacy could get them. It was in what it let them express, who it let them connect with. That night, she brought in a box of writing paper and envelopes she'd asked Caleb to order from town. She set them on the table before the men arrived. When they filed in, all 6 of them, even Jessie, she said, "Tonight, you're going to write letters to anyone you want, family, friends, people you haven't talked to in years, people you've been meaning to contact but never had the courage or ability." Roy frowned. "That's the lesson? Letter writing?" "That's the lesson." Clara handed out the paper. "Everything you've learned, reading, writing, grammar, spelling, it's all been leading to this. Communication, connection, the ability to reach across distance and say something that matters to someone who matters." "What if we got nobody to write to?" Spider asked. "Then write to yourself. Write down your story, your experiences, the things you've seen and done that nobody else has." Clara's voice was gentle. "Everyone has something worth saying. You just need to figure out what that is." For the next 2 hours, 6 men bent over paper, struggling to find words for feelings they'd buried for years. Tommy wrote to his mother, whom he hadn't seen since he was 14. Pete wrote to a brother who'd headed west and disappeared. Dutch wrote to a woman he'd loved before the war, unsure if she was even alive but needing to say the words anyway. Jessie sat frozen for 20 minutes, staring at blank paper. Then, slowly, he began to write. Clara didn't look over his shoulder, didn't intrude, just let him work, his pen scratching across the page with increasing intensity. When the session ended, Marcus asked, "You got stamps? Way to mail these?" "Caleb's heading to town next week. He'll take them." Clara collected the sealed envelopes. "And if anyone writes back, I'll make sure you get the replies." The men filed out, quieter than usual, each of them carrying something invisible and heavy. Jessie was last. He stopped at the door. "I wrote to my father," he said quietly, "man who threw me out when I was 16, told me I was worthless, that I'd never amount to anything." "What did you say to him?" "That he was right. I didn't amount to anything, but I can read now and write and think, and that's more than he ever gave me credit for." Jessie's voice was raw. "I don't know if he'll ever read it, don't even know if he's alive, but I needed to say it anyway." That took courage. "No, it didn't. Courage would be believing things can get better." Jessie looked at her. "But at least I said my piece. That's something, I guess." He left. Clara stood in the empty teaching room, surrounded by the ghost weight of words these men had poured onto paper, and felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, from something else. Something that felt like witnessing people become fully human in a world that wanted to reduce them to just bodies that lifted things. Caleb found her there, wiping her eyes, trying to pull herself together. "You okay?" he asked. "They wrote letters," Clara said, "to people they haven't talked to in years. And Jesse actually reached out to someone, even though it terrifies him."
This story was
"That's good."
posted on the channel West
Caleb
of
leaned against
Betrayal.
the doorframe.
Please do not
"That's real
repost
progress."
it in any form.
"It is." Clara looked at the stack of sealed envelopes on the table. "But it's also heartbreaking, because some of these people probably won't write back. Some of them are probably dead. And these men are going to wait and hope and maybe get nothing." "Maybe. Or maybe they get everything." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Maybe Marcus's sister writes back. Maybe Tommy's mother is thrilled to hear from him. Maybe Pete finds his brother. You can't control outcomes, Clara. You can only give people the tools and hope they use them well." "I want more than that. I want what? Guaranteed happy endings? Perfect results?" Caleb shook his head. "Life doesn't work that way. Out here especially. You teach them, you give them chances, and then you let go and trust they'll figure out the rest." Clara knew he was right, hated that he was right. But she nodded anyway. 3 weeks later, the first letter arrived. It was for Marcus, from his sister in St. Louis. Clara watched him open it with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the page, his weathered face transforming as he read. When he looked up, there were tears on his cheeks. "She remembers me," he said hoarsely. "After 20 years, she remembers. Says she thought I was dead, says she's been praying I'd contact her." He clutched the letter. "Says I can come visit any time I want." The other men gathered around, slapping Marcus on the back, celebrating like he'd won a fortune. And maybe he had. Not money, something better. Proof that he still mattered to someone, somewhere. Over the next month, 3 more letters came. Tommy's mother wrote back with news of family, with love, with an invitation to come home if he ever wanted. Pete's brother was alive, working a ranch in Montana, eager to reconnect. Even Dutch got a response from the woman he'd loved. She'd married someone else, had children, but she remembered him fondly and thanked him for the kind words. Only 2 men got nothing. Spider, who'd written to a father that never responded, and Jesse, whose letter came back marked "Return to Sender," addressee unknown. Spider shrugged it off. "Figured as much," he said. "Old man never gave a damn anyway." But Jesse took it hard. He withdrew again, stopped participating, sat through lessons like a ghost. Clara tried to reach him, but he'd rebuilt his walls even higher than before. Then the accident happened. It was mid-February, the kind of day where the cold was so intense it made thinking difficult. The men were out moving cattle from winter pasture to a field closer to the barn. Clara was in the house, preparing lessons, when she heard shouting. She ran to the window, saw men running, saw chaos, grabbed her coat and ran outside without thinking. The scene was nightmare. Cattle everywhere, panicked and stampeding, men trying to control them, getting knocked down, trampled. And in the middle of it all, Caleb on the ground, his horse rearing above him, hooves coming down. Clara screamed, couldn't help it. The sound tore out of her throat as she watched Roy and Dutch drag Caleb out from under the horse, his body limp, blood already staining the snow. She ran, didn't think, just ran toward them, slipping in the snow, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. By the time she reached them, the men had Caleb on his back. His face was gray, his breathing shallow. Blood everywhere. His leg was bent at an angle that made Clara's stomach turn. "How bad?" she gasped. "Bad." Roy's face was grim. "Legs broke, maybe ribs. Could be internal bleeding. We need to get him inside." They carried him to the house, moving as carefully as they could while Caleb groaned through clenched teeth. Clara ran ahead, cleared the kitchen table, grabbed blankets and water and anything else she could think of. When they laid Caleb down, his eyes found hers. "I'm fine," he muttered. "You're not fine. You're broken." Clara's hands shook as she tried to assess the damage. "We need a doctor." "Nearest doctor's in Ridgeway, 10 miles. Marcus's voice was flat. "In this cold, that's half a day round trip, maybe more." "Then someone needs to go, now." The men looked at each other. Finally, Roy said, "I'll go. But it'll take time, and there's no guarantee he'll come out in this weather." "Make him come." Claire's voice was steel. "Tell him it's life or death. Tell him whatever you have to. Just get him here." Roy left. The other men drifted back to the bunkhouse, knowing there was nothing they could do. Clara was left alone with Caleb, who was slipping in and out of consciousness, his breathing ragged. She'd never felt more helpless in her life. She could read. She could write. She could teach men to decode contracts and understand medical instructions. But she couldn't fix this, couldn't stop the bleeding or set the bone or do any of the things that actually mattered in this moment. "Clara," Caleb's voice was weak. "Listen. Save your strength. Shut up and listen." His eyes focused on her with effort. "If I don't make it, you're going to make it. If I don't, the ranch goes to Roy. He knows how to run it. Papers are in my desk. Second drawer. Caleb, and you." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "You stay. As long as you want. Teach the men. They need you." Clara felt something crack in her chest. "You're not dying. You don't get to die." "Wasn't planning on it, but just in case." His eyes started to close. "You did good here. Better than good. You changed things." Then he was unconscious, and Clara was alone with just the sound of his labored breathing and the wind howling outside. She stayed with him through the afternoon, into evening, through the long dark hours when she wasn't sure he'd make it to dawn. She cleaned his wounds as best she could, kept him warm. Talked to him even though he couldn't hear, telling him stories about Philadelphia, about teaching, about stupid things that didn't matter but filled the silence. Roy returned after midnight with the doctor, a tired man who looked annoyed to be dragged out in the cold until he saw Caleb's condition. Then he got to work, setting the leg, binding the ribs, checking for internal damage. Clara watched from the corner, useless and terrified. "He'll live," the doctor said finally. "But he's going to be down for weeks, maybe months. That leg needs time to heal proper, and the ribs are going to hurt like hell for a while." "What does he need?" "Rest. Someone to keep an eye on him. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid like try to work before he's healed." The doctor packed his bag. "You his wife?" "His teacher." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Well, you'll have to do. Keep him in bed. Force liquids. If the fever spikes or he starts coughing blood, send for me immediately." He left. Clara stood in the kitchen, looking at Caleb unconscious on the table, and felt the weight of the ranch settle on her shoulders. Someone had to run things. Someone had to keep everything from falling apart. And that someone, apparently, was her. Morning came cold and merciless. Clara hadn't slept. She'd moved Caleb to his room once the doctor left, sat in a chair beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, terrified that each breath might be the last. But he held on. Fever burned through him in waves, and twice she'd had to wake him to force water down his throat, but he held on. When pale light finally crept through the window, Clara stood on stiff legs and walked to the kitchen. Her reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, hair wild, dress stained with blood, eyes hollow from exhaustion and fear. She looked like she'd survived a war, felt like it too. The door opened. Roy stepped inside, snow on his shoulders, his face serious. "How is he?" "Alive. Barely." Clara moved to the stove, started building a fire with hands that trembled. "The doctor said weeks, maybe months before he can work again." "That's a problem." "I know." Roy crossed to the table, sat heavily. "Ranch don't run itself. Cattle need feeding. Fences need mending. We got a buyer coming in 3 weeks for 20 head, and if we can't deliver, we lose the contract, lose the money. And without that money, we can't pay wages or buy supplies for spring." Clara turned to face him. "So what do we do?" "We?" Roy's eyebrow lifted. "Last I checked, you're the teacher. Ranch business ain't your concern." Caleb's unconscious in the next room. Someone has to make decisions. And unless you're volunteering to step up, that someone is me. Clara's voice was harder than she felt. "So, what do we do?" Roy studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You know anything about running a ranch?" "No." "You know anything about cattle? About managing men? About negotiating sales or dealing with buyers?" "No." "Then how exactly do you plan to—" "I can read." Clara cut him off. "I can write. I can do arithmetic. And I'm assuming Caleb keeps records. Books. Documentation of how this place operates. So I'll read them. I'll learn, and I'll figure it out the same way I figure out everything else, by refusing to quit. Roy almost smiled. Almost. You got guts, I'll give you that. Guts won't feed cattle or mend fences. No, but they might keep this place from falling
This story
apart.
was posted on the
Roy
channel
stood.
West of Betrayal.
Caleb's office
Please
is
do
down
not
the hall,
repost
second
it
door.
in any form.
You'll find his books there, records going back 5 years. Study them, figure out what needs doing. Then we'll talk about how to actually do it. He left. Clara stood in the empty kitchen, feeling the weight of what she'd just taken on pressing down like a physical thing. She didn't know how to run a ranch, had no experience with livestock or land management or any of the 100 brutal tasks that kept a place like this functioning. But she'd meant what she said to Roy. She could read, she could learn, and she'd walk through a blizzard to teach 6 stubborn cowboys their letters. Running a ranch couldn't be that much harder, could it? Caleb's office was small and meticulously organized, shelves lined with ledgers, each one labeled by year. A desk with neat stacks of papers, contracts, receipts, correspondence, maps of the property pinned to the walls, showing pastures and water sources and fence lines. Clara sat in Caleb's chair and pulled the most recent ledger toward her. The numbers swam before her exhausted eyes at first. Income from cattle sales, expenses for feed, supplies, wages, loans taken out and paid back, profit margins so thin they were almost non-existent. She could see Caleb's entire financial life laid out in careful columns, and what she saw terrified her. One bad season, one missed sale, one unexpected disaster, and this whole operation would collapse. And now it had. The disaster was lying unconscious down the hall with a broken leg and possibly broken ribs, and Clara was supposed to somehow keep everything from imploding. She spent the next 4 hours reading, learning the rhythm of the ranch, the cycle of buying and selling, the delicate balance of managing men and livestock and land. By the time the sun reached its weak midday peak, Clara had filled 3 pages with notes and had a basic understanding of what needed to happen in the next 3 weeks. The cattle needed to be gathered from winter pasture and held in the near corrals for the buyer. That required all 6 men working full days. The fences between here and the gathering point needed repair. One section had collapsed in the last storm. That was another full day of work, and someone needed to contact the buyer, confirm the date and time, negotiate final price. Clara could handle the buyer. The rest required Roy. She found him in the barn, checking on the mare that had finally foaled, a spindle-legged colt that wobbled on uncertain feet while its mother watched with nervous eyes. "I need you to manage the men," Clara said without preamble. "Caleb's books show we need 20 head ready for sale in 3 weeks. That means gathering cattle, repairing the south fence, and getting everything in order for inspection." Roy didn't look away from the colt. "And what'll you be doing while I'm managing?" "Running everything else, keeping Caleb alive, handling the financial side, making sure we don't starve or freeze or fall apart." Clara moved closer. "I know you don't report to me. I know this isn't how things usually work, but unless you want this ranch to fail, we need to work together. So I'm asking, will you help me?" Roy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You ever given orders to men before?" "I've taught them. That's close enough." "It ain't even remotely close." Roy finally looked at her. "Teaching is asking, managing is telling, and most men don't take well to being told what to do by a woman." "Then they can leave." Claire's voice was flat. "Anyone who can't follow orders while Caleb's down can find work elsewhere. We don't have time for pride or politics. We have 3 weeks to save this operation. That's all that matters." Roy studied her face. Whatever he saw there must have
This story
satisfied
was
him because
posted
he
on the
nodded
channel
slowly.
West of Betrayal.
"All right,
Please do not
I'll
repost
manage
it
the men.
in any form.
But you need to back me up. If I say something needs doing, you support it. No second guessing in front of the others." "Agreed. But same goes for you. I make decisions about finances and sales. You support them." "Fair enough." Roy extended his hand. Clara shook it. His grip was calloused, strong, but he didn't crush her fingers the way some men did when shaking hands with women. Just firm acknowledgement of an agreement between equals. "We start tomorrow," Roy said. "South fence first, then gathering. You handle the buyer? I'll write him today. Confirm everything's on schedule." They separated to their respective tasks. Clara returned to the office, drafted a letter to the buyer in Caleb's name, sealed it for Roy to take to town. Then she went to check on Caleb. He was awake. Barely. His eyes found her as she entered, and he tried to sit up before pain slammed him back down. "Don't move," Clara ordered, moving to his side. "Doctor said you need to stay still or you'll make everything worse." "Ranch," Caleb rasped. "Who's—" "Roy's managing the men. I'm handling the rest. We've got everything under control." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You don't know how to run a ranch." "I'm learning. Your books are very thorough." Clara poured water, helped him drink. "We have a buyer coming in 3 weeks. Roy's getting the cattle ready. I'm coordinating everything else. You just need to focus on healing." "Clarity?" "No." She set the cup down firmly. "You're in no position to argue. You're in no position to work. So you're going to lie there and recover while the rest of us keep this place from falling apart. Understood?" Caleb stared at her. Then, impossibly, he smiled, slight, pained, but real. "You're terrifying when you're bossy," he said. "Good. Maybe you'll actually listen to me." She left him to rest and went back to work. There were supplies to inventory, meals to plan, 100 small tasks that apparently fell to whoever ran the household. Clara had never cooked for 7 people, had never managed a pantry or calculated how much food was needed to feed working men through the end of winter. But she figured it out through trial and error, burning her first attempt at bread and nearly salting the stew into inedibility before getting the hang of it. The men ate her cooking without complaint, which Clara suspected had more to do with hunger than quality. But they showed up for meals. They did the work Roy assigned, and slowly the ranch continued functioning despite Caleb's absence. The days blurred together. Clara would wake before dawn, check on Caleb, cook breakfast, spend the morning managing ranch business from the office, cook lunch, teach in the evenings, then stay up late going over books and planning the next day's tasks. She was running on 4 hours of sleep and sheer stubbornness, and she could feel herself fraying at the edges. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because if she stopped, everything would collapse. Tommy noticed first. He lingered after a lesson one night, watching Clara clean up with movements that had become mechanical. "You look exhausted," he said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're doing 3 people's work and pretending it ain't killing you." Tommy hesitated. "We could help with the ranch stuff, with Caleb, with cooking. You don't have to do everything yourself." Clara set down the slate she was holding. "I appreciate that, Tommy, but I can handle it." "Can you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to collapse." His voice was gentle but firm. "You taught us we're stronger together than alone. Maybe you should take your own advice." He left. Clara stood in the empty teaching room, his words echoing. She was doing 3 people's work, and she was barely holding on. But asking for help felt like admitting weakness, like proving she couldn't handle what she'd taken on. The decision was made for her the next day when she collapsed. She'd been in the barn helping Roy inventory tools when the world suddenly tilted. Clara grabbed for something to steady herself, missed, and went down hard. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Roy shouting her name. She woke in her own bed, blankets piled on top of her, with Marcus sitting in a chair beside her looking worried. "What happened?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. "You fainted. Been out for 3 hours." Marcus poured water, helped her drink. "Doctor came by. Said you're exhausted and half-starved. Said if you don't rest, you're going to do permanent damage." "I don't have time to rest. You don't have a choice." Roy's voice came from the doorway. "You're done. For today at least. Maybe tomorrow too." Clara tried to sit up. The room spun. "The ranch? We'll survive without you for a day." Roy crossed his arms. "We've been talking, me and the others. You've been carrying too much. So we're redistributing. Tommy's taking over cooking. Dutch and Spider are handling supply inventory. Jesse's managing the books. Turns out he's got a head for numbers. And I'm coordinating everything with you instead of making you do it alone." "I didn't ask for—" "No, you didn't, because you're too stubborn to ask for anything." Roy's expression softened slightly. "But we're offering anyway. You taught us to read and write and think. Least we can do is keep you from killing yourself trying to save this place." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Say thank you and go to sleep." Roy turned to leave, then paused. And Clara, what you've done here, keeping this ranch running while Caleb's down?
This story
That's
was
more than
posted
teaching.
on the channel
That's
west
leadership.
of Betrayal.
Don't forget that.
Please do not
left.
repost it in any form.
Clara lay back on the pillows, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. Not from sadness, from something else, from being seen, from being valued, from 6 rough cowboys who'd learned to read and were now using that knowledge to save her the way she'd tried to save them. She slept for 14 hours straight. When she finally woke, it was to the smell of bacon and coffee. Clara dressed slowly, her body still aching, and made her way to the kitchen. Tommy was at the stove, cooking breakfast with surprising competence. The table was set. The fire was going. Everything was running without her. "Sit, Saw Sweet," Tommy ordered when he saw her. "You're eating before you do anything else." Clara sat. Tommy placed a plate in front of her. Eggs, bacon, toast that was only slightly burned. She ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered it needed fuel. "Roy's got the men on fence repair," Tommy said, sitting across from her with his own plate. "Jesse's in the office going over the books. He found some discrepancies in last month's feed costs that might save us money. And I'm handling meals till you're back on your feet." "You don't have to." "We know we don't have to. We want to." Tommy's voice was firm. "You gave us skills. Now we're using them. That's how this works, right? We learn, then we apply what we learned to make things better." Clara felt that tightness in her throat again. "You're a good student, Tommy." "I'm a good student because you're a good teacher. Now eat your breakfast and stop arguing." She did, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt the crushing weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. She wasn't alone in this. Didn't have to be. These men had learned more than just reading and writing. They'd learned to function as a team, to support each other, to step up when someone needed help. Over the next week, the ranch found a new rhythm. Clara still managed the overall operation, but now she had help. Jesse took over the financial records and proved to have an uncanny ability to spot errors and inefficiencies. Tommy's cooking improved daily, and he started experimenting with recipes he'd found in an old cookbook Clara had discovered in Caleb's kitchen. Dutch and Spider handled the physical labor of supply management, freeing up time for the others. Even Pete, Quiet Pete, who rarely spoke, started taking initiative on small repairs around the property. And Roy coordinated it all, translating Clara's decisions into action, managing conflicts, keeping the men focused and productive. Caleb watched this transformation from his bed, where he was slowly, grudgingly healing. Clara would sit with him in the evenings, updating him on ranch business, and she could see the surprise in his eyes as she described how the men had organized themselves. "They're using what you taught them," he said one night. "Not just reading and writing, critical thinking, problem solving, working together." "They're surviving," Clara replied. "Same as all of us." "It's more than survival, it's growth." Caleb shifted, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You've changed this place, Clara. Changed these men. They're not just cowboys anymore. They're capable of anything." "They were always capable. They just needed someone to show them that. And you needed them to show you that you can't do everything alone." Caleb's eyes were sharp despite the pain medication. "You learned that yet?" Clara smiled. "I'm working on it." The 3 weeks passed faster than Clara expected. The cattle were gathered, the fences repaired, everything prepared for the buyer's inspection. The morning he was scheduled to arrive, Clara stood in the yard watching the men move the selected cattle into the holding corral with practiced efficiency.
This story was posted on
They
the
worked
channel
like a
west
unit
of
now,
Betrayal.
anticipating each
Please
other's
do not
moves,
repost it
communicating
in
with
any
gestures
form.
and shouts that had become a language unto themselves. Roy approached, his face serious. "Everything's ready. Cattle are good. Paperwork's in order. You know how to handle this buyer?" "I read every contract Caleb's ever signed with him. I know what to expect." Clara's voice was calmer than she felt. "Trust me." "I do." "That's the problem." Roy almost smiled. "You've gotten us this far. Don't screw it up now." The buyer arrived at noon, a thick-bodied man named Hutchins who looked at Clara with barely concealed disdain the moment she introduced herself. "Where's Holt?" he demanded. "Mr. Holt was injured and is recovering. I'm managing the ranch in his absence." Clara kept her voice professional. "The cattle are ready for your inspection, if you'll follow me." Hutchins' lip curled. "I don't do business with women." Then you'll miss out on 20 head of quality cattle at a fair price. Clara met his eyes. Your choice, Mr. Hutchins, but we have other buyers interested if you'd rather walk away. It was a bluff. They had no other buyers. But Clara delivered it with enough confidence that Hutchins hesitated. Let me see the cattle, he said finally. Clara led him to the corral. Hutchins spent 20 minutes inspecting the herd, checking teeth and hooves and general condition. Clara stood silent, letting the quality of the livestock speak for itself. Finally, Hutchins turned to her. They're good. Better than last time, actually. He pulled out a contract. Standard terms. $15 a head. $300 total. Clara took the contract, scanned it quickly. Everything matched what she'd read in Caleb's records. But then she saw it. A clause buried in the fine print that reduced payment by $2 per head for transportation costs that hadn't been in previous contracts. This transportation fee, Clara said, pointing, it's new, and it's not justified. Your ranch is the same distance it's always been. You're attempting to reduce payment by $40 through deceptive contract language. Hutchins' face flushed. That's standard practice. No, it's theft disguised as business. Clara's voice was steel. Remove the clause or find your cattle elsewhere. You can't. I can, and I will. Clara handed the contract back. I've read every agreement Mr. Holt has signed with you over the past 5 years. This transportation fee never existed before, so either you're trying to take advantage of his absence or you're trying to see if a woman is too stupid to notice. Either way, I'm not interested. Hutchins stared at her. Then slowly, he pulled out a pen and crossed out the transportation clause. Fine. 300 even, but you're making an enemy here. I'm making a fair deal. If that makes me your enemy, I'll survive. They signed the revised contract. Hutchins paid in cash, $300 that felt like a fortune in Clara's hands. When he left, driving the cattle ahead of him with poorly concealed anger, Clara stood in the yard and allowed herself one moment of pure triumph. Roy appeared beside her. You just faced down Hutchins and won. That's impressive. I just read a contract and refused to be cheated. That's basic literacy. Clara looked at the money in her hands. Which is exactly what I've been teaching you all along. Still impressive. Roy's voice held something that might have been respect. You saved us $40 and kept our reputation intact. Caleb couldn't have done better. Caleb taught me everything I needed to know through his records. I just applied it. That's the point. You learned. You adapted. You won. Roy nodded toward the house. Go tell him. He'll want to know. Clara found Caleb in his room, finally able to sit up without pain contorting his face. She told him about the sale, about Hutchins' attempted deception, about how she'd caught it and forced the correction. You read the contract, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. I've been reading all your contracts, learning how these deals work, understanding the language buyers use to hide theft. Clara sat on the edge of his bed. You were right. Knowledge is power, and out here it might be the only power that matters. You're a quick study. I had a good teacher. Clara smiled. Your records are meticulous. It's like you documented everything specifically so someone could learn from them. Maybe I did. Caleb's voice was quiet. My brother died because he couldn't read. I wasn't going to let this ranch die because I didn't document how to run it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb said, The men have changed. The whole ranch has changed. You know that? They're just using the skills I taught them. No, it's more than that. They're confident now. They believe they can learn anything, do anything. That's dangerous. Clara frowned. Dangerous how? Because confident men don't stay cowboys forever. They start wanting more. Tommy's going to leave eventually, try to become a writer. Jesse's going to use those number skills somewhere bigger. Hell, even Roy's been talking about maybe buying his own place someday. Caleb met her eyes. You've given them the tools to outgrow this ranch, to outgrow me. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Caleb's voice was honest. Part of me is proud. Part of me is terrified of losing good men. And part of me wonders what happens when you outgrow this place too. Clara felt her breath catch. What makes you think I will? Because you're like them. You learned how to run a ranch in 3 weeks, face down a buyer who's been doing this for 20 years. You're not a teacher anymore, Clara. You're a rancher, a manager, a leader. And eventually you're going to realize you could do this anywhere, with anyone, and you won't need this broken down operation or the man who runs it. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. Clara reached out, took his hand carefully. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "You say that now. I mean it. This place, these men, you. This is the first time in my life I felt like I actually matter. Like what I do has real consequences and real value. Why would I leave that?" Clara squeezed his hand. "I didn't come here because I wanted to. I came because I had nowhere else to go. But I'm staying because I want to. That's the difference." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he squeezed back, his grip weak but steady. "Then I guess we're stuck with each other." "I guess we are." Outside, the men were celebrating the successful sale, their voices carrying through the evening air. Clara could hear Tommy laughing, Roy giving orders for tomorrow's work, Jesse's quiet voice adding something that made the others laugh harder. They sounded happy, united, like a family instead of just hired hands. And Clara realized that's exactly what they'd become. Not through blood or obligation, but through the shared struggle of learning and growing and surviving together. She'd given them literacy, they'd given her purpose, and together they'd built something that felt dangerously close to home. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't quite trust the prairie to deserve it. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen mud beneath. The wind shifted from brutal to merely cold, and Caleb finally began to heal. Clara watched him take his first real steps in early March, leaning heavily on a cane Roy had carved from oak. His face was tight with pain and concentration, but he made it across the kitchen without falling. Small victory, huge milestone. "Don't push it," Clara warned as he reached the door. "I've been in that bed for 6 weeks. I'm done being an invalid." Caleb's voice was rough with frustration. "I need to see the ranch. Need to know what's been happening while I was useless." "You weren't useless. You were healing." Clara moved to his side, ready to catch him if he fell. "And the ranch is fine. Better than fine, actually. We sold another 10 head last week. Jesse renegotiated our feed contract and saved us $30 a month. Well, Tommy's been writing articles about ranch life and actually got one accepted by a newspaper in Denver. They paid him $12. Caleb stared at her. $12? For writing? For good writing, about real experiences. Apparently people back east can't get enough of frontier stories. Clara smiled. He's using the money to buy books. Wants to improve his craft. And the others? Marcus has been corresponding with his sister. She's planning to visit this summer. Pete's brother is coming too. They're talking about going into business together, buying a small ranch in Montana. Dutch is teaching Spider to read music from an old hymnal he found. And Roy... Clara paused. Roy's been looking at property. Serious looking. He might actually try to buy his own place. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I told you this would happen. They're outgrowing this place. They're growing. That's different. Clara opened the door, let fresh air sweep into the house. And growing doesn't mean leaving. It means becoming more than they were. That's what you wanted, isn't it? I wanted them to be able to read their wage slips, not abandon me. Nobody's abandoning you. They're just seeing possibilities they didn't know existed. Clara looked at him. And you're happy for them. I can see it under all that grumpy posturing. Caleb almost smiled. I'm not grumpy. I'm realistic. You're grumpy, but you're also healing. So let's get you outside before
This
you find
story was
something else to
posted on the
complain
channel
about.
west of Betrayal.
They made it to the porch.
Please do not
Caleb
repost
stood
it
there,
in any form.
breathing hard from the effort, looking out at the ranch he'd nearly died for. The men were working in the near pasture, repairing winter damage to the corrals. Even from a distance, Clara could see they were different from the rough, suspicious cowboys she'd met 5 months ago. They moved with purpose, communicated clearly, worked together like pieces of a machine that actually functioned. You did this, Caleb said quietly. All of this. We did this. All of us. Clara watched Roy directing the others, watched Tommy pause to write something in the notebook he now carried everywhere. Watched Jesse calculate measurements with the confidence of someone who understood numbers weren't enemies, but tools. I just showed them the door. They're the ones who walked through it. That's not how they see it. Caleb leaned against the porch railing, taking weight off his bad leg. You're a hero to them. The woman who risked everything to teach them, who walked through a blizzard, who saved the ranch when I couldn't. Clara felt heat rise to her face. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to quit. Same thing, out here. They stood in silence, watching the men work. Then Caleb said, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in his voice made Clara turn. What? When I was lying there broken, thinking I might die, I realized something. Caleb didn't look at her. This ranch, these men, you're all I have. My brother's dead. Got no other family. Never wanted one. But somewhere along the way, this place became more than just a business. It became, he struggled for the words. It became what matters. Clara waited, sensing there was more. And you, Caleb continued, you showed up with nothing but a teaching certificate and more stubborn pride than sense, and you changed everything. Made me care about things I'd stopped caring about. Made me want to build something that lasts instead of just surviving day to day. Caleb, I'm not good at this. At words. At feelings. At any of the things that apparently matter to normal people. He finally looked at her. But I need you to know that what you've done here, what you've built with these men, what you've become to this place, it matters. You matter. More than I know how to say. Clara felt her throat tighten. You're doing pretty well for someone who's not good at words. I'm serious. I know. Clara reached out, took his hand. And I need you to know something too. When I came here, I was running from failure, from shame, from a world that told me I wasn't good enough. But this place, these men, you showed me I was wrong. I am good enough. Better than good enough. I'm valuable. Essential. And I've never felt that before. They stood there, hands clasped, while the wind blew across the prairie and carried the sounds of men working and horses nickering and life continuing despite everything that had tried to break it. So what happens now? Caleb asked quietly. Now we keep building, keep growing, keep making this place something worth fighting for. Clara squeezed his hand. Together. Together, Caleb echoed. And for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled, really smiled. Not the almost maybe smile he usually allowed himself, but a genuine expression of something that looked dangerously close to happiness. The weeks that followed brought changes none of them had anticipated. Tommy's article in the Denver newspaper caught attention. An editor wrote back asking for more stories, offering $20 per piece if they met quality standards. Tommy threw himself into writing with the same intensity he'd brought to learning to read, filling notebooks with observations and dialogue, and descriptions of ranch life that were raw and honest, and completely unlike the romanticized frontier stories most papers published. Jesse used his growing financial knowledge to help other ranchers in the area understand their contracts, charging a small fee for the service. Word spread. Soon he was spending 2 days a week traveling to neighboring ranches, teaching men to spot the same deceptive clauses Clara had caught in Hutchins' contract. He was making more from consulting than from cowboy wages, and the pride in his voice when he talked about helping others avoid being cheated was something Clara had never heard before. Marcus's sister arrived in May, a plump, cheerful woman who cried when she saw her brother and immediately declared she was moving to a small house in Ridgeway to be closer to him. She brought with her news of family, photographs of nieces and nephews Marcus had never met, and a reminder that connection mattered more than distance or time. Pete and his brother bought their Montana ranch using money they'd saved combined with a loan Pete had negotiated himself, reading every word of the contract, understanding every clause, signing with confidence instead of fear. He left in June with promises to write, to visit, to stay in touch with the men who'd become his family. Dutch and Spider remained, content with ranch life, but transformed by literacy into men who read newspapers, wrote letters, understood the world beyond their immediate experience. They became the stable foundation of the crew, the ones who stayed while others grew and moved on. And Roy surprised everyone by announcing he'd found property 20 miles west. A small operation, just enough land for a modest cattle herd and room to grow. He'd saved his wages, negotiated a fair price, and signed the deed with his own hand. He'd be leaving by fall. You taught me I could be more than someone else's hired hand, he told Clara the day he gave notice. Taught me I could own something, build something, Be someone who matters. You always mattered, Claire replied. Not like this. Not with proof on paper that I can sign and understand and use to build a life. Roy's scarred face was serious. You gave me that. All of us. We were just bodies before you showed up. Now we're men with futures. He left in September. The same month, Tommy departed for Denver to work as a junior reporter for the newspaper that had been buying his stories. The bunkhouse felt empty with only Dutch, Spider, and 2 new hands who'd been hired to replace the others. But it wasn't a sad emptiness. It was the space left by men who'd grown beyond what this ranch could offer. Caleb watched them go with a mixture of pride and loss. I'm losing my best men, he said one evening as he and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the prairie orange and gold. You're not losing them. You're launching them. Clara looked at him. And you can hire new men. Teach them the same way I taught the others. Build them up the same way. That was your job, your magic. It wasn't magic. It was literacy and time and refusing to give up on people everyone else had written off. Clara leaned back in her chair. And you can do that just as well as I can. Maybe better, now that you understand how it works. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, I want to expand the program. Hire men who can't read and make teaching part of the job. Build a ranch that's known for taking broken men and making them whole. That's ambitious. I learned from the best. He looked at her. But I can't do it alone. I need a partner, someone who understands education and ranch management and how to turn desperate people into something extraordinary. Clara felt her heart start to race. What are you asking, Caleb? I'm asking if you'll stay, not as the teacher, not as the temporary manager filling in while I healed. Caleb turned to face her fully. I'm asking if you'll be my partner, equal share in the ranch, equal say in how it's run, equal stake in everything we build. Clara struggled for words. That's a significant commitment. I know. You barely know me. I've been here less than a year. You're offering me half of everything you've built over decades based on what? A few months of teaching and managing while you were injured? I'm offering it based on watching you transform 6 illiterate cowboys into educated men with futures, based on watching you save this ranch from collapse, based on knowing that everything I've built means nothing if it dies with me. And you're the only person I trust to carry it forward. Caleb's voice was intense. I'm offering it because you're the best thing that's happened to this place in 20 years, and I'm not stupid enough to let you go. Clara stood, moved to the porch railing, looked out at the land she'd come to love despite its harshness. What if I fail? What if I'm not as good as you think? What if... Then we fail together, and we get up and try again. Caleb stood too, moving slowly but steadily. Clara, you walked into a blizzard to teach 6 men their letters. You faced down an experienced buyer and won. You ran this entire operation while I was broken. If you can do all that, you can do anything. So stop doubting yourself and give me an answer. Clara turned to face him. His eyes were steady, certain, completely serious. This wasn't a casual offer. It was a commitment, a future, a partnership that would bind them together in ways she'd never let herself imagine. Yes, she said, on one condition. Name it. We expand the teaching program like you said, but we don't just hire men, we take in women too. Ones like me who have nowhere else to go, ones who've been told they're not good enough or too difficult.
This story was
or too
posted
educated
on the
for their
channel
own
West
good.
of Betrayal.
Claire's voice was
Please
fierce.
do not repost it
We
in
built
any
something
form.
that gives everyone a chance, not just the men. Caleb considered this. That's going to be complicated. Women on a working ranch, men who aren't used to... I know it's complicated. Everything worthwhile is complicated. Clara crossed her arms. But if we're going to build something that matters, let's actually build it. No half measures, no compromises. Real change. A slow smile spread across Caleb's face. You drive a hard bargain. I learned from the best. Deal. Caleb extended his hand. Clara shook it. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she pulled him close and kissed him. It was awkward at first. Neither of them were particularly good at this kind of thing. But it was real, honest, a promise made without words that they were in this together, whatever came next. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was grinning like an idiot. That was unexpected. Good. You needed unexpected. Clara smiled. Now, let's go write up a proper partnership agreement before you change your mind. They spent the evening drafting the document that would make Clara a legal co-owner of the ranch. Caleb wrote in his careful script while Clara reviewed every clause, every term, making sure it was fair and clear and exactly what they'd agreed to. When they both signed it, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, not quite certainty, but something solid, something real. The next morning, she wrote to her father in Philadelphia. It was the first letter she'd sent since leaving, and it took 3 drafts to get the tone right. Not apologetic, not angry, just factual. She told him about the ranch, about the men she'd taught, about running the operation while Caleb healed, about becoming a partner in a business that was building something meaningful. She didn't ask for his approval. Didn't need it. Just wanted him to know she'd survived, thrived, even. Despite everything he'd said about her being too difficult, too educated, too stubborn to make it in the real world. She never got a response. But she didn't need one. The letter wasn't really for him. It was for her. Proof that she'd made it, that she'd built a life worth documenting. Winter came again, but this time Clara was ready. The house was stocked with supplies. The cattle were healthy and well-fed. The new hands, 3 men and 2 women Caleb had hired at Clara's insistence, were progressing through their lessons with the same hunger for knowledge the original 6 had shown. And the teaching program had expanded to include basic bookkeeping, contract law, negotiation skills, and everything else Clara and Caleb had learned were essential to survival out here. The women were a revelation. Both of them had similar stories to Clara, educated, rejected, desperate when they arrived. Both of them threw themselves into learning ranch management with fierce determination, and both of them proved just as capable as the men at everything from cattle handling to financial planning. The men grumbled at first, then gradually accepted it, then eventually became protective allies who shut down anyone from neighboring ranches who suggested women didn't belong on working operations. By the time spring came again, a full year since Clara had walked through that blizzard, the ranch had transformed completely. It was no longer just a cattle operation. It was a training ground, a refuge, a place where people who'd been told they weren't good enough came to prove everyone wrong. And Clara stood at the center of it, no longer the desperate woman with 23 cents and nowhere to go, but a landowner, a teacher, a leader who'd built something that mattered from nothing but stubborn refusal to quit. Tommy came back to visit in May, successful and confident, his articles appearing regularly in 3 different newspapers. He'd brought copies of everything he'd published, and he and Clara spent an afternoon reading through them, laughing at his early attempts and marveling at how much he'd improved. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. "Without you showing me I was capable of more." "You were always capable. You just needed permission to try." Clara smiled. "And now you're giving other people that same permission through your writing. That's the real success." Jesse came through in June, traveling between ranches, his consulting business thriving. He'd put on weight, lost the hollow look that had haunted him when Clara first met him. He spent an evening teaching the new students his favorite contract reading tricks. And Clara watched him transform into the teacher he'd never thought he could be. Roy sent letters regularly, full of updates about his ranch, about the men he'd hired, about the woman he'd met in town who made him think maybe he wasn't meant to be alone forever. He was building something, creating something, living instead of just surviving. And Marcus, now reunited with family, spent his days working the ranch, but his evenings writing letters to nieces and nephews, building relationships that had been lost for decades. He moved slower now, the arthritis getting worse, but he moved with purpose, with connection, with proof that he mattered to people who loved him. One evening in late summer, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch watching the new students practice their penmanship in the teaching room, their voices carrying through the open window. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and the air smelled like grass and horses and the particular scent of prairie before rain. "You know what I realized?" Clara said quietly. "What?" "I came here thinking I was saving them, teaching these rough men to read so they could survive." She leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "But they saved me. Showed me I was capable of more than I thought." That being difficult and stubborn and too educated wasn't a flaw. It was exactly what was needed to build something like this. "You saved each other. That's how it works." Caleb put his arm around her. "You showed them they could learn. They showed you that teaching matters, and together you built something neither of you could have built alone. We built it. All of us, Clara corrected. You gave me the chance. The men gave me their trust, and I gave them the tools. But the building, that was collective. From inside, one of the new students, a woman named Sarah who'd arrived 3 months ago with nothing but a black eye and a desperate need to disappear, called out, "Miss Clara? I finished the contract analysis you assigned. Can you check it?" Clara smiled. "Duty calls." She stood, but Caleb caught her hand. "Before you go, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Are you happy? Really happy? Not just content or satisfied, but actually happy with how things turned out?" Clara looked at him. At the ranch, at the students inside learning the skills that would change their lives, at the land she'd come to love despite its harshness, at the life she'd built from absolutely nothing. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "This place, these people, you, this is everything I didn't know I needed. So, yes, I'm happy." Caleb stood, pulled her close. "Good, because I'm planning on keeping you around for a while." "Just a while?" "Forever, if you'll have me." Clara kissed him, not caring that the students inside could probably see, not caring about propriety or proper behavior or any of the 1,000 rules she'd been taught about how ladies should act. Out here, none of that mattered. What mattered was building something real with people who valued what you could do over who you were supposed to be. When she finally pulled away, Sarah was knocking on the window, holding up her contract analysis with an expectant expression. Clara laughed and headed inside to check the work of a student who reminded her so much of herself a year ago, it was almost painful. The teaching room was warm and bright. 5 students bent over their work. 3 men, 2 women, all of them focused and determined. Clara moved between them, checking progress, offering corrections, praising success. This was what she'd been meant to do. Not teaching needlepoint to rich girls who didn't care. Not fighting for scraps of respect in a world that didn't want educated women. But this, building capable people from desperate ones, turning shame into pride and ignorance into power. Sarah's contract analysis was nearly perfect. Just one clause she'd missed, a subtle piece of legal language designed to hide unfair terms. Clara showed her how to spot it, watched understanding dawn in her eyes, and felt that familiar warmth of watching someone level up. "You're getting good at this," Clara said. "I had a good teacher." Sarah smiled. "And I'm motivated. I don't ever want to be in a position where someone can cheat me again because I don't understand words." "Then you'll keep learning, keep improving, and someday you'll teach someone else what I taught you." Is that what happened with the first students? They left and started teaching others? Some of them, the ones who understood that knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded, it's meant to be shared. Clara looked around the room. That's what we're building here. Not just a ranch, a system. A way of taking people who've been broken by the world and giving them the tools to fix themselves and help others. The students worked until 9, then filed out into the night, tired but satisfied. Clara cleaned up the teaching room, organized materials for tomorrow's lesson, and finally allowed herself to rest. Caleb found her there, half asleep in a chair, exhausted from a full day of ranch work and teaching. "Come on," he said gently. "You're done for the day. I need to prepare. Tomorrow. Tonight you rest." He led her to their room, the one they'd been sharing for 3 months now, since the night she'd agreed to be his partner in more than just business.
This
Clara
story was
changed into her
posted on the
nightdress
channel
and climbed
west
into
of the
bed
trail.
beside him,
Please
feeling
do
the
not
warmth of
repost
another
it
person
in any form.
after years of sleeping alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked in the darkness. "Answering my advertisement? Coming to this isolated place? Giving up the chance to go back to civilization?" Clara thought about it. About Philadelphia with its rules and restrictions. About the teaching jobs that had rejected her for being too difficult. About the life she'd been expected to live versus the life she'd built. "No," she said firmly, "I don't regret any of it. This place gave me something civilization never could. A chance to matter. To build. To be exactly as difficult and stubborn and educated as I am without apologizing for it." "Good." Caleb pulled her closer. "Because I need you here. This ranch needs you. Those students need you. I need them too, need this." Clara settled against his chest. I spent my whole life trying to fit into spaces that were too small for me. And then I came here, to this big empty prairie, and finally had room to be everything I was meant to be. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the wind outside and the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, the hands were probably playing cards or reading or writing letters to family. Somewhere in Ridgeway, Tommy's articles were being read by people who'd never set foot on a ranch. Somewhere in Montana, Pete was building his own operation. Somewhere, Jesse was teaching another desperate rancher to read contracts. Somewhere, Roy was planning a future with the woman who'd made him believe in second chances. And here, in this bed, in this house, on this ranch, in the middle of nowhere, Clara Whitmore, once rejected, once desperate, once standing in the dirt with 23 cents and no hope, finally understood what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not acceptance, not approval, not permission to exist in someone else's world, but the power to build her own world, to set her own terms, to create something that mattered and claim her place in it without apology. She'd come to the frontier with nothing, and she'd built everything, not by being softer or quieter or more acceptable, but by being exactly who she was, difficult and stubborn and too educated for her own good, and refusing to back down when the world tried to break her. The ranch would continue. The students would learn and grow and leave to build their own futures. New desperate people would arrive with nothing, and Clara would teach them the same way she'd taught the others. The cycle would repeat, expanding outward, creating ripples of change that would touch lives she'd never meet. And Clara would be here, at the center of it all, doing what she'd been meant to do from the beginning. Building people who built themselves, teaching power to the powerless, proving that the only thing standing between desperation and triumph was knowledge, courage, and the stubborn refusal to quit. She fell asleep with Caleb's arm around her and the sound of the prairie wind singing outside, finally at peace with the woman she'd become and the life she'd fought so hard to create. In the morning, there would be work, students to teach, a ranch to run, problems to solve. But tonight, there was just this moment of quiet satisfaction, this proof that she'd survived, that she'd won, that she'd walked into the wilderness with nothing and emerged with everything that mattered.